The moment my boss told me my career track was being reviewed, I didn't panic. I'd earned it. 2 years at the company, consistently above target, the person people pinged when something was on fire and no one wanted their name attached to it. I worked in a mid-sized SaaS company on the client implementation side, not glamorous, but high visibility. Our team owned onboarding for enterprise customers, which meant timelines, integrations, and a lot of quiet politics. If a launch went well, sales took credit. If it went badly, implementation took the hit. I learned fast that being good wasn't enough. You had to be reliable in a way that made other people look good too. My boss, Derek, liked me because I was predictable. Not boring, predictable. I didn't miss deadlines. I didn't argue in meetings. I didn't embarrass him in front of directors. When he'd tell the team, we need a plan by EOD, I'd already have a draft half written. And then there was Maya. Maya wasn't technically above me, but she was above consequences. She'd been there longer, had this loud, confident energy, and Derek treated her like she was the face of the department. She talked a lot in meetings, the kind of talking that sounds like leadership if you don't track details. She used phrases like high-level alignment, strategic touch points, and we're all rowing in the same direction, then would miss the actual deliverable. The first time I noticed the pattern, I assumed it was a bad week. Everyone has those. She forgot to send a client a key document, and I caught it because the customer emailed me directly, asking politely if we'd change direction. I sent the document, smoothed it over, and told myself it wasn't worth making a thing out of it. Then it kept happening. A requirements doc that was half copy-pasted from another account. A JIRA ticket marked done, with no acceptance criteria met. A meeting with a client that she insisted went great, even though the client followed up to say they were confused and wanted clarification. And every time, Derek reacted the same way. He laughed it off, reframed it as growing pains, or blamed the client for being high maintenance. Maya would roll her eyes, make a joke, and everyone would move on. The reason it worked is because there was always someone quietly catching the fall. Usually me. I didn't do it because I was trying to be a hero. I did it because I hated messy work. I hated having a customer angry at the team. I hated escalation emails and emergency calls and late-night fixes that could have been avoided. If I could patch something in 15 minutes and prevent a week of damage, I did it. But there's a cost to always being the person who patches things. You start becoming invisible. The week everything started to shift was a launch for a new enterprise customer, a finance company that had been sold on a seamless integration timeline. The contract start date was locked. Their internal stakeholders were already nervous. They'd had a failed implementation with another vendor the year before, so they were hypersensitive to anything that smelled like disorganization. In our kickoff call, Maya did her thing. She talked big, promised smooth milestones, told the client we'd handle the heavy lifting, and kept calling their technical lead by the wrong name. I watched her do it and felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my face neutral because that's what you do in front of customers. After the call, Derek messaged me privately. "Great job keeping us on track in there," he wrote. "Can you make sure the integration plan doc is cleaned up before the client review Thursday? Maya's swamped." It was a small thing on paper. Clean up a document. But I knew what it meant. Maya had owned the plan. Maya had presented it. And now I was being asked to fix whatever holes were in it so she could present it again, like it was polished from the start. I opened the doc. It wasn't a doc. It was a mess. Half the sections were blank. The timeline was copied from a completely different customer with a different tech stack. The risk list didn't match the actual scope. There were comments still embedded in the margins like, "Ask Derek what we're doing here," and to do, "Invent a mitigation." The client review was in 2 days. I stared at it for a long minute, then did what I always did. I rolled up my sleeves and started rebuilding it. I pulled the real requirements from the emails. I checked the SO. I verified the integration method with our solutions engineer. I updated the timeline so it wasn't fantasy. I wrote a clean risk section with realistic mitigations and named owners, including myself, because at that point I'd learned that unnamed risks become other people's blame later. I finished around 9:30 p.m. and sent it to Maya with a simple message. Updated based on actual scope plus SE input. Please review before Thursday so we're aligned. She responded the next morning with a thumbs up emoji and perfect. Thursday came. The client review meeting started on time. Maya was leading. Derek was there. A director popped in at the beginning for visibility, which always meant someone wanted to see if the team was impressive enough to justify headcount next quarter. Maya shared her screen and started walking through the doc. At first it went fine. She read the highlights I'd written, used the exact phrasing I'd used in the doc, and the client nodded along. I didn't care that she was using my work. Not yet. I cared that we were stable. Then the client's technical lead asked a direct question about a specific integration dependency. The kind of question you can't float above with buzzwords. It required an answer that matched the doc. Maya paused. I could see her eyes moving fast across the page, looking for something that wasn't there. She said, "Right, so we're still finalizing that, but the approach is flexible." It wasn't flexible. It was decided. I'd confirmed it with the SE and written it down. The client's lead frowned. "But your plan says you'll use the API-based method and need our security team to approve by next Wednesday." Maya smiled like it was adorable they were reading. "Yes, exactly. That's an example timeline." The director's camera was on. Derek's camera was on. And I watched Maya casually downgrade the only solid plan we had into an example because she didn't understand it enough to defend it. I felt my stomach drop. Not from fear, from anger. Controlled, quiet anger. Because I knew what happened next. If this went sideways, Derek would say we overcommitted. Maya would say the client changed requirements. And I'd be the one in the late-night calls fixing the damage. So I did something small. I unmuted. "Just to clarify," I said, calm, even like I was correcting a typo. "We confirmed the API-based method with solutions yesterday. It's the recommended path for their current setup, and the security approval date is tied to their internal review window. If that date slips, our downstream timeline shifts." There was a beat of silence. Maya looked at me, not angry, not yet. More like surprised I'd spoken without permission. The client's lead nodded, relieved. The director's eyes flicked slightly, like he was filing something away. Derek said, "Good point," and moved the conversation forward. The meeting finished. The client was satisfied. No immediate fire. But as everyone dropped off the call, Maya stayed on for a second longer than usual. She didn't say anything in the meeting chat. She didn't react with her usual friendly sarcasm. She just watched me through the camera like she was deciding what kind of problem I'd become. An hour later, Derek wrote in our team Slack channel, "Quick reminder, we present as one team. Let's be mindful about undermining each other in front of clients. No names, no direct accusation. But everyone knew exactly who he meant." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I opened our internal ticket for the client's integration plan, the one Maya had been assigned as the owner for. I added a short, factual comment. "Integration approach confirmed with SE on 5/14. Document updated accordingly. Presenting plan as example may create misalignment with client security timeline." I didn't insult her. I didn't accuse her. I didn't use emotional language. It was just a timestamp, a decision, and a consequence. My finger hovered over "save" for a second because I knew what that comment really was. It wasn't documentation. It was me stepping out from under her shadow. The shift was immediate, even if no one said it out loud. By the next week, I wasn't looped into meetings I'd always been in. Calendar invites stopped appearing. Decisions that used to involve me were suddenly summarized, after the fact, usually with a vague, "we aligned offline." When I asked questions, Derek answered with the kind of tone people use when they're trying to sound patient. "Let's not overcomplicate things," he'd say. "We'll circle back. Trust the process." Maya, on the other hand, got louder. She started framing everything as a team harmony issue. In meetings, she'd say things like, "We've had some communication challenges internally," and glance in my direction without looking directly at me. She told a story, not with facts, but with tone. The story where she was trying to keep things positive, and I was the one bringing tension. I didn't react. I kept my head down and did my work. That turned out to be a mistake. 2 Fridays later, Derek asked me to hop on a quick call. No agenda, no context. Just, "Got a few minutes?" The call started friendly. Too friendly. He asked how I was doing. He said he appreciated my consistency. He told me he wanted me to have a long future here. And then he leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "But there's been some feedback, not performance feedback, team feedback." He said Maya felt undermined. He said she felt I'd corrected her publicly. He said it had created discomfort. He said perception mattered as much as execution, sometimes more. And then he said the sentence that changed how I saw everything. "For now, I think it's best if we pause any conversations about advancement until this is resolved." I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish. He explained that my promotion track, the one we discussed for months, was being temporarily suspended. Not canceled, not denied, just paused. Until I took accountability, until I apologized to Maya for how I'd handled myself. I asked him calmly what exactly I'd done wrong. He sighed, like I was missing the point. "It's not about being right. It's about respect." I asked if there was a specific policy I'd violated. He said no. I asked if my work quality was in question. He said absolutely not. I asked if the client had complained. He said no. They were happy. Then I asked, "So you're freezing my career progression because I clarified a factual point in a meeting?" There was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough for him to choose his words. "I'm freezing it because you refuse to support your teammate in the moment." That's when I understood what was actually happening. This wasn't about behavior. It was about hierarchy. Maya wasn't just a colleague. She was protected. And I'd crossed an invisible line by not playing my role. Derek told me to think it over the weekend. He said an apology didn't have to be dramatic. Just a conversation. Just reassurance. Clear the air. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at my wall. That night, I pulled up every document I'd ever touched for that team. Not emotionally, methodically. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for patterns. And once you start looking, they're hard to miss. Emails where Maya promised timelines she never owned. Tickets closed without validation. Client-facing decks that contradicted internal plans. Escalations quietly rerouted to me. Praise flowing upward. Work flowing sideways. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was focused, though on Monday I didn't apologize. Instead, I sent Derek a short message asking for clarity. I asked if HR was aware my advancement had been formally paused. I asked if there was documentation outlining expectations for reinstating it. I asked if this was considered a performance action. He didn't respond for 3 hours. When he did, it was a meeting invite. HR included. The tone changed immediately. HR asked questions Derek hadn't expected. About process, about precedent, about whether other employees had been subjected to similar pauses without formal review. Derek tried to keep it informal, but HR doesn't do informal when careers are involved. They asked me if I agreed with the characterization of my behavior. I said I agreed that I'd spoken in a meeting. I said I disagreed that it was disrespectful. I said I could provide documentation showing why I spoke and what I was clarifying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just offered facts. After the call, Maya messaged me for the first time in weeks. "I didn't want it to go this far," she wrote. "This feels extreme." I stared at the message. Extreme was working late to fix someone else's mistakes and being punished for refusing to lie about it. Extreme was being told my career was conditional on my willingness to play along, so I didn't reply. That afternoon, I updated my resume for the first time in years, not frantically, carefully. I listed what I'd actually done. Launches saved, clients retained, revenue protected. I reached out to 2 former colleagues at other companies. I didn't badmouth anyone. I didn't tell a story. I just asked how stable things were on their end. By the end of the week, something else happened. A client escalated. Not my client. One of Maya's. And for the first time, no one looped me in to quietly fix it. They thought I was still playing the same role. They were wrong. The escalation hit on a Tuesday morning, not dramatic, no shouting, no emergency meeting with cameras on, just a calendar invite titled Client Concern Priority that suddenly pulled in a director, someone from support, and Derek. Maya was listed as the owner. I wasn't on the invite. That was new. I found out about it an hour later when support pinged me privately and asked if I had any context on a missing data sync for a finance client. Not my finance client. Another one. One Maya had been running end-to-end for months. I replied honestly. I said I wasn't involved. I said I hadn't seen their integration plan. I said I didn't know what commitments had been made. There was a pause. Then support asked, "Do you know where the documentation would be?" I told them to check the project folder. They did. It wasn't there. What followed wasn't an explosion. It was worse. It was a slow unraveling. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started surfacing. A missed approval, a dependency that had never been confirmed, a client assumption that had been treated like a fact. Every issue was survivable on its own. Together, they painted a picture no one wanted to look at. Derek tried to contain it. He reassigned tasks quietly. He asked people to help out where they could. He stopped copying Maya on certain threads. He started asking me questions again, cautiously, like he was testing whether I'd still catch him if he slipped. I answered what I was asked. Nothing more. That decision changed everything, because without someone absorbing the impact, the system started to feel its own weight. Clients escalated through official channels instead of informal messages, support log tickets instead of DMing favors. Directors asked for written updates instead of verbal assurances. And every time someone asked, "Who owns this?" the answer was visible in the tools. It wasn't me. Maya reacted the only way she knew how. She talked more. She reframed issues as unexpected client behavior. She blamed onboarding complexity. She said things were misinterpreted. She started using words like blockers and external constraints without being able to name them. People stopped nodding. One afternoon, a director joined a client call unannounced. The client asked a straightforward question about why a promised milestone hadn't happened. Maya gave a vague answer. The director asked her to clarify which internal team had caused the delay. She named one. That team immediately corrected her, politely but on record. Silence followed. Not awkward silence, the kind that forces decisions. After that, Derek called me into a meeting again. This time his tone was different. Less authority, more calculation. He said the team was under pressure. He said leadership was asking questions. He said it might help if I re-engaged more proactively. He didn't mention the apology. He didn't mention the pause promotion. I told him I was happy to support within my assigned scope. He frowned. "You used to be more flexible." I looked at him and said evenly, "I was asked to stop undermining my teammate, so I stepped back." He didn't like that answer. HR reached out the following week, not to discipline me, but to check in. They asked if I felt my role had changed. They asked if I had experienced any retaliation. They asked if I had documentation supporting my previous statements. I said yes. I said I'd already provided it. I said I was willing to answer questions. That was when the review became formal, not a witch hunt, a process. Suddenly there were timelines, comparisons, audit trails, questions that required evidence. not confidence. Maya struggled there. She always had. She'd built her value on presence, not structure. Derek struggled too, because once the questions were written down, his decisions were written down with them. Why certain issues hadn't been escalated, why ownership had been unclear, why performance concerns had been reframed as interpersonal conflict. None of it was illegal, none of it was malicious, but it was visible. By the time leadership stepped in, the narrative had flipped. This wasn't about a difficult employee refusing to apologize. It was about a department that had relied on one person to stabilize chaos, while protecting another from accountability. I didn't celebrate when Maya was removed from client-facing work. I didn't feel triumphant when Derek was told his team structure would be reviewed. I felt something quieter, relief. Because for the first time, the truth didn't need defending. It was already documented. A recruiter emailed me the same week. One of the colleagues I'd reached out to earlier had mentioned my name internally. The role was similar. The scope was larger. The title was clearer. I didn't rush. I didn't threaten. I didn't leverage it in a meeting. I just listened. On Friday, Derek asked if I had time to talk about the future. I told him I did, and for the first time since this started, I walked into his office without my hands shaking. When I sat down in Derek's office that Friday, there was no small talk. No, how are you? No jokes about being busy. He closed the door, stayed standing for a second longer than usual, then sat down like someone who already knew how the conversation was going to end. He told me leadership had reassessed the situation. He said there had been process gaps. He said the department needed clearer ownership and accountability going forward. He didn't say Maya's name at first. Then he did. She was being reassigned to an internal role. No clients. No visibility. A better fit for her strengths, he called it. The words were careful, legal, designed not to sound like what it actually was. A removal. He told me my promotion track was no longer paused. He said we could revisit timelines next quarter. He said the misunderstanding had been unfortunate. I listened. I nodded. I let him finish. Then I told him I wouldn't be revisiting anything. I told him I'd accepted another offer, not dramatically, not as a threat, just as information. A role with clearer scope, direct ownership, and leadership that evaluated performance with metrics instead of loyalty. I didn't name the company. I didn't justify myself. I said I'd be giving notice. For the first time, Derek looked genuinely caught off guard. He asked if there was anything they could do. He said the timing was bad. He said I was important to the team. He said he wished I'd come to him earlier. I told him I had. I reminded him that when I did, my career had been used as leverage to force an apology for something I didn't do. I told him I'd learned from that. I said it calmly, without accusation, because at that point, it wasn't about blame anymore. It was about boundaries. My last 2 weeks were quiet. No farewell lunches, no big announcements, just handoffs, documentation, and a few private messages from people thanking me for things I'd done that had never been acknowledged out loud. One person admitted they hadn't realized how much I'd been covering until I stopped. On my final day, I handed in my laptop and walked out without looking back. 3 months later, I heard through a former teammate that the department had been restructured. Derek no longer ran it. Maya was still there, still employed, but no longer protected by proximity. She was, finally, just another name in the system. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard that. I felt finished. The new job wasn't perfect. No place is. But when something went wrong, the conversation was about facts, not feelings. When I spoke up in meetings, it was expected. When I delivered results, they were mine. I never did apologize to the golden employee. And it turns out I didn't need to. The only thing I needed to do was stop fixing problems that weren't allowed to be named, and let the truth stand long enough for everyone else to see it.